What do you see is going on here? Is their activity in the West Bank a sign that they think their fighting in Gaza is closer to coming to an end?
I don't know if they can assume that. I would hope that the conflict in Gaza is coming to an end so there can be a ceasefire and an exchange of hostages as such, and then a plan for a state for the Palestinian people. But as far as the West Bank is concerned, I think the Israelis have adopted a policy of preemption. They are not going to wait to be attacked. As they were planning, they were seeing a plan evolve with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and they attacked. They're going to do the same thing in the West Bank, and so I don't think this came about overnight. I think this was long in the planning. I don't think the Biden administration or Biden-Harris administration had any foreknowledge of this, as negotiations are continuing to take place about Gaza in Egypt and elsewhere. But the Israelis have made it clear they're not going to wait. They're going to preempt whenever they can. My hope is they don't adopt the same plan of making a desert and calling it peace, to simply level all of the infrastructure in the West Bank and say, now we have peace. I don't think that will work. I think they'll be more specific than in their targeting, but not adopt a wholesale policy as they've done in Gaza.
Well, and as you allude to the ongoing ceasefire negotiations when it comes to Gaza, the U.S. keeps forecasting or telling us there's progress, and yet it does never seem to yield a deal in which all sides agree. So are you feeling confident that the ceasefire is ever going to happen, or should we be calling it a ceasefire? Is this more about humanitarian aid and the exchange of hostages now?
Well, I'm less confident than I was last week. The only optimism is they're still talking. As long as they're talking, there's still hope. But I think as we get closer and closer to a supposed agreement, either the Hamas or the Iranians through Hamas or Hezbollah or the Islamic Jihad or through the Houthis take some steps to break this up. It's very clear that Iran's goal is the destruction of the state of Israel. That's clear from the very beginning. And they want us, the United States, out of the Middle East so they can continue their revolution and establish an imperial regime throughout the region. So that's their goal. What we have to do is make sure we support the Israelis and defend them, help them defend themselves, and help them if they're attacked by other parties, including Iran, to defend them. So I think peace is not really in the offing if we look at it right now, but we have to hope that peace can be some measure of peace. I'm not sure there'll ever be peace in the Middle East, given history looking back to in 3,000 years. It's been going on forever. But we have to hope, given the stakes in the world, given the fact that nothing is local, what happens in the Middle East will affect all of us, all of our economies, all of our lives in one way or another. So we have to continue to strive for peace.
Well, sir, as you talk about history in the Middle East, what about history just going back 3 years? It has now been that long since the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and Donald Trump and others have contended that that chaotic withdrawal is actually to blame for some of what we are seeing in the region now 3 years later. What do you think of that?
Well, there were some who felt, and I shared that view, that we should not have had a complete pullout, that we needed to have a residual force, a international residual force with our allies to help maintain some level of deterrence in Afghanistan. That apparently was not the majority feeling in this country. That was not the feeling of Donald Trump, who actually wanted to pull out within 30 days notice. And President Biden said he stretched that out to 6 months, but the withdrawal was not a happy picture, to be sure, and there were lives lost that didn't need to be lost, in my opinion and that of others. But the fact is, it's like anything else. If you create a vacuum, the terrorists will come back. And that is the fear that we have, that there will be a training ground once again for other groups to train in Afghanistan to launch attacks against us and our allies in the region and through other parts of the world. That's the world in which we live. We have to be constantly vigilant. We have to constantly have a counter-terrorist, counterinsurgency strategy and be on guard at all times, because the world is a very turbulent and dangerous place.
Well, and of course, we're seeing turbulence in other areas of the world as well, Mr. Secretary, including the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said this week that he would like to have a discussion with President Biden at the UN General Assembly next month about bringing an end to this war, discussing a plan to force Russia to halt its invasion of Ukraine. He said that this would comprise a powerful package to use diplomacy, economic steps, and consider Ukraine's place in the global security architecture. What do you expect that plan could actually look like?
Well, there were many proposals at the very beginning when Putin invaded Ukraine. There were proposals that what a settlement might look like. The fact is that President Zelensky has said, I'm not giving up 1 inch of Ukrainian territory to the Russians, who have violated the international rules of law, the rules we've had in place since the end of World War II, and I want all my territory back. Many people felt that was unrealistic, but on the other hand, the Ukrainians were willing to fight and die for it. At this particular point, I don't think that the Ukrainians can hope to win through negotiation what they can't win on the battlefield. They're going to have to inflict much more damage against the Russians before Putin will be willing to say, let's make a deal. So I think in the time between now and the UN General Assembly, between now and the time that winter sets on, I think with the help of the United States and the European allies giving Ukrainians much more firepower, that may give them an opportunity to reach some sort of an accord with the Russians. But I think Putin's going to have to suffer much more before he agrees to any kind of a compromise.
Well, and do you think Putin will ever get to that point so long as China is still in his corner? I ask you this, sir, knowing U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is in China as we speak, meeting with senior officials. What role does China play in this, and frankly, the Middle East as well, all of the conflicts globally we're talking about?
Well, as far as the Russians are concerned, they're waiting and hoping that former President Trump will be elected. He has told Putin, take whatever you want of Ukraine, do whatever hell you want throughout the NATO countries. And so the Russians are looking for a Trump victory to give them the victory they want in taking all of Ukraine. With respect to China, China is supporting Russia, and they're supporting them covertly, if not overtly, in providing them with some munitions, also coming from North Korea. But the Chinese are more focused up at this particular point on what's going on with respect to Taiwan. From the Chinese perspective, if President Trump were elected and if he were to sell out the Ukrainians, they would look at that and say, well, wait a minute. If the U.S. is not willing to help Ukraine, which is fighting for its freedom, why would they want to come all the way over to China off the coast of Taiwan and fight to defend the Taiwanese? They would look upon that as an incentive to take either military action or certainly action which could isolate the Taiwanese and could count on the United States not to come to the Taiwanese aid. So there's a lot involved geopolitically in terms of who gets elected, how they're calculating that. But we also have to send a strong signal to the Chinese. Don't take action. You need not take action. We're not supporting independence of Taiwan. You need not be that aggressive against Taiwan, and you surely shouldn't be that aggressive against the Philippines, because we have a military treaty, a mutual treaty with the Philippines, to a defense treaty, not only with the Philippines, but also with Japan in that greater region. We have a lot at stake. I think the Chinese would make a big mistake if they were to use force, and I don't think they're planning on that at this point.